Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dawn Wallin, and I am the director of the 26th National Congress on Rural Education in Canada. I will be your host for this afternoon's opening ceremonies. I welcome you from Treaty 6 territory in Saskatchewan, Canada, and homeland of the Métis and the Michif. I cannot tell you what a pleasure it is to be able to gather here today with you to share our passion for rural and remote education, schools, and communities. I want to thank each of you for your commitment to our event, as we have seriously revisioned ourselves in this virtual space. Last year, we unfortunately had to cancel what was our silver anniversary of the event due to COVID-19. It was heartbreaking to let so many of you down who've been championing our event and our Congress over the past 25 years. To that end, I want to acknowledge the Department of Educational Administration in the College of Education that encouraged us to revision our event. People like Dr. Murray Scarf and Dr. Pat Renahan built this Congress over the last 25 years. And the current department members wanted us to carry on that tradition and see what we could accomplish in a new format. So the idea has afforded us this brand new platform with an incredibly diverse set of learning opportunities that we can share together over the next day and a half, and helping us to demonstrate and fulfill what our University of Saskatchewan wants us to do, our motto, to be what the world needs. So it is customary in our territory that we begin an important event like this with ceremony and protocol that first acknowledges the land, its first peoples, and our relationships to each other. To that end, it is normally the case that we offer tobacco to an Indigenous elder prior to the event, out of respect for the first peoples who have been stewarding this land for millennia. And we request that they conduct a ceremony on our behalf. However, even though we normally do this prior to the event, because we know that we have so many of you coming to our territory virtually from all over the world, Elder Don Spidell has agreed to share this protocol publicly with you so that we may learn from this teaching. So before I move any further, I would like to offer Elder Don Spidell tobacco and ask him for a land acknowledgement and an honor song to begin our event in a good way. Elder Spidell, on behalf of the 26th National Congress on Rural Education in Canada, we would ask you to please offer a land acknowledgement that acknowledges Mother Earth and all that she's sustained us, to acknowledge the ancestors that have taught us how to live well together in rural spaces, and to please offer an honor song for everyone across the world who has come to gather in this event so that we can learn and affirm our relationships with each other.
Thank you very much. I accept your tobacco. Friends and relatives, ladies and gentlemen, as we begin this prestigious moment here, we invite each and every one of you to join us here in this virtual opening and to bring us here through this tobacco and through this invite to come and join us from our lands to your lands. And at this time, I'm just going to touch this tobacco symbolically to the earth, make a motion, a gesture that way. And in this way, it connects us to the ancestral land, to the ancestral place in which our ancestors mutually coexisted and brought us here to this time in the year 2021 through education, through many efforts of people coming together to unite us in many ways. This land has absorbed and has seen so much. And so today we welcome you here to the unceded territory of the Dakota people from the Whitecap Dakota First Nation, to the present time Treaty 6 territory, to all the signatures of Treaty 6 territory, and of course to our friends, our relatives, brothers and sisters of the Métis and Michif nations. And symbolically here today with this tobacco and with the hope and the will of each and every one of you as As a humanitarian effort, we come together to bring awareness, to educate ourselves, and continue to unify through building awareness and educating ourselves through knowledge. And so today I bring a song that historically has been a part of who and what we are throughout our time and our history, and to know that the drum resonates throughout the land wherever we travel, and that each drum has a voice, and it voices for those that perhaps cannot convey a message for themselves, but that this drum can convey that message for us, the song. And so I invite you in your home and wherever you may be at this time in your learning space, and this observation of this song and the observation of this opening, that you could stand. And if you have, our old people used to say, if you have water or maybe you have tobacco near you, you could hold that for this time here to virtually situate yourself to where we are here today. And so we unite in this song here today, and I thank you very much for the invite. So, oh hey, oh hey, yeah yeah yeah.
Thank you, Elder Spadell, for bringing us together with this positive spirit and intent today. Just to let you know that Elder Don Spidell is a Lakota traditional knowledge keeper and language speaker who lives on Whitecap, Dakota First Nation. He serves as a cultural resource liaison with Saskatoon Public Schools. And I'm not sure that I've met anyone who believes more strongly in the importance of culturally responsive education. And he enacts this commitment daily through his work with youth, the sharing of cultural teachings in schools and communities, and serving as a guide for educators. I've learned so much from your teachings, Don, and I uplift you with the gifts and the knowledge that you've shared with us today. So now I'll ask you to keep standing, please, as we sing our national anthem of O Canada. And please join me wherever you are, if you're able. O Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all of us command. With glowing hearts we see thee rise, our true north strong and free. From far and wide, O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God keep our land glorious and free. Oh, thee. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. So in our effort to create a safe event, we're following all COVID-19 safety protocols, and we're unfortunately unable to bring the many people together who wanted to welcome you to our live streamed event. Nevertheless, in true prairie spirit, a host of dignitaries have offered greetings of welcome to our province and to our Congress. Our first greeting is offered by the Honourable Lieutenant Governor Russ Morasity.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this National Congress on Rural Education in Canada. I'm recording this message at Government House in Regina, which is in Treaty 4 territory and homeland of the Métis. I want to thank Elder Spidell for his prayer and honor song. My thanks to the Planning Committee for inviting me to participate and for their work in creating this online gathering. Thank you for bringing people together from diverse perspectives. I've always had a keen interest in education, and I've had the good fortune of being involved in a number of educational initiatives and organizations. The most impactful on a personal level was a province-wide student-first engagement process. I was also a member of LEADS, the League of Educational Administrators, Directors, and Superintendents, and a board member of the MacDowell Foundation, which supports research on teaching and learning in the Saskatchewan public school system. Through these activities, I have become familiar with challenges for rural and remote education, including infrastructure needs, access to technology and services, access to specialized supports, and recruitment of teachers, among others. In addition to these issues, the pandemic has greatly increased pressure on administrators, teachers, students, and families. They have chosen to see these various challenges as opportunities and have responded in many creative ways. I've also seen how communities have responded to systemic changes to ensure that their educational needs are being met. This includes the establishment of community-based approaches to training educators, as they have done in La Loche, La Ronge, and Cumberland House. These degree programs will ensure the recruitment and retention of local people who have the requisite knowledge of culture, traditions, and language. As we work to improve education, it is important to recognize Indigenous perspectives. We are seeing increased awareness and interest in land-based education. I grew up in La Ronge, in northern Saskatchewan, surrounded by the forests and lakes of the north, and I believe that outdoor education is a rich resource, literally at our doorsteps. Education is key to the success of our youth. Educational opportunities impact the lives of students and their families, and also the future of our communities and our country. Thank you for working to improve education for all, and for recognizing the need for equitable learning opportunities for all students. Please accept my best wishes for a successful and enjoyable Congress. I look forward to joining you online for some of the conference sessions. I will close by bringing greetings on behalf of Her Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II, Queen of Canada. And in the spirit of reconciliation, I would also like to share these greetings in my first language, which is Woodland Cree. Nimidhitin, kitapita matawao, tamiskatuin, gitoga maskuoche, Elizabeth II. Kigitoga maskuino, utagitaskino, Canada. Ninanaskumun.
We wish to thank His Honor for not only the lovely address, but also that sincere acknowledgement of the strength and beauty of rural communities and people, and of the languages that make this province traditionally proud. I'll also draw your attention right now to our website, where we've included a greeting from our Minister of Education, who could not be with us this evening, the Honourable Dustin Duncan. who offers us best wishes for a successful event and welcomes all of you virtually to our Congress today. Our third greeting is offered by the Interim Dean of our College of Education, Dr. Beth Busson. Welcome, Beth.
Thank you, Dr. Wallin, and thank you, Elder Spidell, for helping us to begin today's proceedings in a good way. I acknowledge that I live and work on the territory of Treaty 6 and the homeland of the Métis, and I urge you, wherever you are, to acknowledge the Indigenous ancestors of your place. On behalf of the College of Education at the University of Saskatchewan, I'm delighted to welcome you to the National Congress on Rural Education in Canada. Founded in 1996, the Congress has a long history of encouraging networking opportunities and the sharing of knowledge related to the improvement of instruction and programming in rural and remote areas of Canada and beyond. Last March, the 25th anniversary celebrations of the Congress were canceled because of the pandemic. This year, we are delighted that the Planning Committee has been able to envision a renewed Congress in a virtual format, which has allowed the participation of people from beyond the borders of Saskatchewan. The Congress has continued relevance to educators, researchers, school boards, and trustees in Canada and elsewhere. I would like particularly to acknowledge the contribution and dedication of Dr. Dawn Wallin, the Director of the Congress, and her Planning Committee. The National Congress on Rural Education focuses on the critical and important role that schools play in their communities. The learning sessions that you will experience will illustrate how proactive and engaged leadership at all levels can deliver high quality and innovative education to children and youth across our country and beyond. I commend all of you on your dedication to current and future generations of learners. We are fortunate to be joined by attendees and presenters from Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Alberta, British Columbia, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Ontario, Uganda, Scotland, France, China, Mongolia, England, New Zealand, and throughout the United States. Thank you to all of those near and far who have joined us. You are in for an exceptional event that will no doubt showcase the breadth of experience in rural education and provide you with excellent learning opportunities. I wish you the best during the next 2 days.
Thank you, Dr. Busson. I want to acknowledge the Dean's gracious support that has included the sponsorship of graduate student registrations so that they may attend the event and learn from all of you who are here from across the world, as well as the in-kind support of time and the planning team to make this event something of which we're actually very proud. So it's now time to turn our attention to our keynote speaker for the evening. Our keynote speaker is offering her address through live streaming, and we want to ensure that each of you have the opportunity to ask questions. To that end, we've created 2 opportunities for participants to share questions that I will moderate at the end of the presentation. So the first method is to send your questions via email to Patricia Prouse of CELU at the email celu.info@usask.ca. Now that you should have been probably using that email a lot the last little while. So again, I will repeat, celu.info@usask.ca. And you can ask those of Patricia. The second method, and we hope all of you will do this for the next day and a half or so, to tweet out your responses, send your questions via our Twitter account to our graduate student support, Idowu Mogaji, at hashtag NCREC 2021. That is National Congress on Rural Education in Canada 2021. Hashtag NCREC 2021. Patricia and Idowu will then collate all of your questions, and I will ask them at the end of the session on your behalf. So this time, I will ask Diana Klybor, who's Account Executive Complex Solutions Business Sales for SaskTel, to introduce our keynote speaker. We really want to, at this time, thank SaskTel for its generous sponsorship of our event and invite Diana to introduce Senator Bev Busson via WebEx. Diana.
To bring birth greetings today on behalf of SaskTel and to introduce today's speaker, Honourable Senator Bev Busson. Before I begin, I'd like to take a moment to respectfully acknowledge that in Saskatchewan, we're on traditional territories of First Nations and Métis people. As we gather virtually across Saskatchewan, we recognize the histories, values, and contributions of Indigenous people. We also acknowledge the historical treaties and the relationships built from them. For over 2 decades, SaskTel has been a proud sponsor of this event, and we are honored to have the opportunity to support the Rural Education in Canada Conference once again this year. At SaskTel, we believe in supporting diverse events and provide opportunities for youth, educators, and institutes to grow their organization. By sponsoring events like this, we can strengthen communications, to develop strategies, to help tackle the challenges modern rural communities face in the education system, allowing students and educators across the province to thrive. Now it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Honourable Senator Bev Busson. Her honors presentation today is Leadership Reframing the Conversation, and I'm sure we're all looking forward to her incredible insight and unique perspective. As a trailblazer in leadership, Bev Busson has built a college of wisdom on the topic of leadership. Her years of service in a career marked with challenges and first, Bev truly understands the caveats and successes involved in the decision-making process of leadership. Her reputation as a straight shooter has earned Bev the respect and support by her displays of strength and integrity in her leadership style. Bev has been sharing her leadership lessons with audiences across Canada. She offers her expertise and advice on how to strategically navigate and lead the workplace with a people-centered approach, all with the unique perspective of a woman employed in a male-dominated field. Her experiences as a uniformed police officer through her extensive work as a serious crime investigator and later as a leader of a 25,000-member police force, Bev not only survived, but thrived in a dynamic and challenging environment. Bev holds a law degree from the University of British Columbia and has also earned 3 honorary Doctorate of Law degrees, one from the University of Fraser Valley, one from Simon Fraser University, and her most recent, awarded in June of 2017 from the University of Regina. Impressively, she's worked her way to become the first female commissioned officer, the first female criminal operations officer, the first female commanding officer of a province, and the first female deputy commissioner of a region. Throughout her career, she challenged gender-based barriers and continued to own her expertise in security, which resulted in her being named one of Canada's most powerful women by the Women's Executive Network in 2006. And later that year was the first woman named to lead the RCMP as the 21st commissioner. Today, Bev continues to serve on a number of boards and committees, along with taking an active role in mentorship projects for young leaders. Please join me in welcoming the Honourable Senator Bev Busson.
Thank you very much. I want to first respectfully acknowledge that I come to you from the traditional territory of the Shuswap people in British Columbia. I want to thank you for the wonderful introduction. I suspect some of you on this Congress have visited the RCMP Heritage Museum in Regina and has seen the stuffed horse there. My son has warned me that when I go to my great reward, the space next to that horse is probably reserved for me. But seriously, I can't tell you how thrilled and excited I am to be invited to talk to you all. The theme for this Congress, Rural Education Beyond Borders, Reframing the Conversation, suggests the obvious, that the heart of education must be revisited in today's context. I can tell you that from my perspective, I think I have come a long way in reframing the conversation. My perspective comes from 33 years in the RCMP, but I believe it is true in any context. This theme, together with recurring topics that are part of the challenge in rural education, both here in Canada and around the world, really resonates with me, and I'm honored to be offering my story and perspective as part of this event. I would like to suggest to you that you cannot aspire to the caliber of education you all wish to deliver without being trailblazers of your own in the issues that matter, like things including respect, understanding, equality, and trust. Commitment and dedication are the watchwords of your contribution to future generations, but this contribution can easily be overlooked as so much of your work as educators is behind the scenes. As we look forward through the 21st century, in every walk of life, the focus on relationships has rightly turned to how we treat each other in the workplace and in the community. As educators, those who are involved in the education system, essentially it boils down again to respect and trust. These are often called the soft skills, but they can be the most difficult to harness of all. For you, it not only affects how you treat one another, but also the life skills and attitudes you represent and pass on to the next generation as well. I believe that this is even more relevant in the rural education environment, as your influence has so much power and can be life-changing. I've had a number of interesting jobs in my life, and I'm now trying to make a difference as a Canadian senator. My story begins, however, when I was preparing to become a high school teacher. I made a career decision at that time to change my direction and try to become an RCMP officer instead. It occurs to me that although many of my experiences are from a policing background, I make no mistake about the level of dedication that is required to commit to the professional excellence that education demands. Especially in the rural environment, you are all leaders, whether you realize it or not, in this environment. In the 1970s, the RCMP had no women, no people of color, no religious diversity, and they didn't even accept people who were too short or too tall, or even married men for that matter. It was in another century for sure. As you've heard from the intro, I was in the first class of women to graduate from the RCMP in 1975. This great step into democracy for the force was more like a push than a leap. And I should have known that day that when I applied that it was going to be a dangerous and challenging career. What was I thinking? The RCMP had been under immense pressure to accept women in the force, especially by the Federal Status of Women Commission, along with other groups. Many police forces in the United States and a few in Canada had women in operational roles, but the RCMP was very resistant and was stalling their decision. I was able to access some reports that showed that as late as January of 1974, the year before women were allowed to join, the powers to be in the force had recommended to the government that women were not required or wanted in the RCMP, probably wouldn't be able to do the job or never really wanted to, and were not suited for the work, especially in rural areas after dark. They suggested that the first women in uniform should be working exclusively at urban airports as special constables. Not surprisingly, the federal government of the day rejected this opinion and directed the force to have women as regular members by the fall of that same year. It was a very demanding diary date. I myself grew up in a traditional family. There wasn't a lot of money to go around, so my dad actually told me that any money for college education in the family would go to my brother. He said he didn't want to waste money on someone who'd get married and leave the workforce to raise a family. I didn't realize it then, but I think he did me a favor by laying down the challenge for me to take control of my life. At the time, I got a student loan to go to Teachers College, my first step at being a trailblazer. I had broken through a boundary, well, at least as far as my family was concerned. I had just graduated when the announcement was made that women could become RCMP members for the first time. At the time, this opportunity appealed to my sense of adventure. As I look back, I wish I had taken a few years to teach, but I felt compelled to seize the moment. I had no idea of the politics that were operating behind the scenes and the pressure that the force was under at the time. I came to know later that this announcement was as big a surprise to most of the force as it was to the public and to me. Every time I think of the culture gap between then and now, the old saying, "You've come a long way, baby," is the only appropriate comment that I can think of. My first clue was when I applied. It was on the very day that the announcement was made in May of 1974, as I was driving past the local RCMP detachment in Nova Scotia. I heard it on the 8 o'clock news flash and felt like destiny was calling my name. I walked through the door of the detachment and there was a young member there. He asked me if he could help, and I told him I wanted to join the RCMP. He said, "We don't take women in the RCMP." And he said, "Yeah." I said, "You do. I just heard it on the radio." At that moment, there was an older member coming through the back door from the parking lot. And this young member said, "Sarge," she says, "we take women in the RCMP." I could hear the trepidation in his voice and saw a slight tear in his eye. And he said, "I just heard it on the news." "What should I do?" said the young member. He said, "Give her an application and see what happens." He knew that life as he knew it had changed forever. I had no idea, however, how my life would change as well, but learned quickly that respecting my decision and believing in myself were going to be an important part of what came next. I went home to tell my parents. You should know that my mother was a big influence in my life and probably my biggest fan. She had been in the Canadian Army during World War II. You may or may not know that women in the armed forces were all sent back to the kitchen after the war. And this sector of the Army was disbanded for a number of years. How far we've come. My father was also a victim of his generation, as he had a perspective from another time. I actually believe that he thought Archie Bunker was real. His first comment sounded something like this: "If you can tell me how many men grow up dreaming to marry a Mountie, I'll be happy about your career path." He really was hoping that I wouldn't get in and that I would go back to teaching until I found a husband to look after me. He was a good guy, but he did not have a lot of future perspective. My mother later told me that he started to get over it. When he went home, he took some targets to work that I had sent home. He showed them to the guys and began to be proud. I was scheduled to write the exam right away, and because it was mainly grade 10, 11, math, English, and history, which were my majors, I made a very good mark. Later that summer, I had to do a medical exam as the process continued. This is a bit risque, but I have to tell you that in the midst of the exam, when the doctor began to chuckle and said, "They want me to get you to cough," he only had the male exam form to use, and he was not referring to the condition of my lungs, I don't think. Every step of the way brought me closer to the future I never imagined. On September 16, 1974, 32 young women were sworn in to the force on the same day at the same time across the country. Concepts like diversity were not fully embraced then, but whether I knew it or not, I was on an adventure into a world with uncharted paths and a part of a social experiment with uncertain expectations. Apart from being a big change for women, allowing women in the RCMP was an even bigger change for the force itself and the men in it, a huge paradigm shift for everyone. A few days before we arrived in Regina, they decided to remove the urinals from our dorm, a sign to all that we were there to stay, we hoped. I remember my first day in Regina. We were all sitting in the dorm waiting for one another to arrive when a troopmate from Edmonton, Alberta, who had driven to Regina, parked her car in front of the dorm. This was forbidden, and obviously she hadn't received that memo. She saw the drill instructor walking by and decided he looked enough like a doorman that she asked him if he would help her with her bags. You can only imagine the noise when he started yelling, "You horrible little woman. If you can't get your luggage up to your dorm, put it back in your car and go back to Alberta." We all ran down and grabbed her bags before she could change her mind. Regina was a bit of a boot camp back then. We also had a little controversy around the uniform. The force hired a fashion company from Montreal to design these uniforms. The same company known for designing airline uniforms. They were fashionable, but not very practical at all. The blouses had no pockets and were made of a clingy material that did not function well in the cold, if you know what I mean. We also had high-heeled shoes, hats that looked like pillboxes, but the worst decision of all was the firearm. In 1974, it was considered a fashion faux pas for a woman to have a gun belt, so we were given purses to carry our Smith & Wesson snub-nosed revolvers in. Our instructors told us that we'd be luckier to hit someone over the head with a purse than to get our gun out in time to help anyone. Luckily, this decision was reversed and we were allowed to wear a gun belt just before we graduated. Unfortunately, the traditional red jacket, high boots, spurs, riding pants, and Stetsons were out of the question. It took 16 years for women to be permitted to wear that uniform, the one that everyone recognizes as the brand of the RCMP. At the time, there were more pressing things to think about and train for, and the uniform issue took backstage to self-defense and other operational courses like law. No one really knew if women could survive in the RCMP policing environment, where rural policing was a key part of that mandate. To many, then and now, the GRC in the RCMP GRC shoulder flash stands for Gravel Road Cops. And in the 70s, that was true. There was a lot of rural police work being done then and now. Portable radios were not yet invented in the 1970s. Many places had no radio coverage and no backup, including the posting I was sent to from Depot. My first lessons on leadership came quickly, and I learned not to allow others to dictate my place in the world and how it would be seen. Each of us have the freedom to choose the perspective we use to decide where we fit. I was sent to Salmon Arm, British Columbia. Some of you may know it is a small, beautiful town of about 12,000 people in the interior of British Columbia. Well, being from Nova Scotia, I thought I was going to be going to the coast because it was named after a salmon. One of my first surprises. I came to realize that fate works in mysterious ways and that sometimes good luck is disguised as bad. This also serves as a reminder that lasting and worthwhile change often begins at the top. In order to show respect for others in your area of responsibility, you have to walk the walk as well as talk the talk. Unknown to me, I was initially posted to a smaller, more remote town, but the staff sergeant there put up quite a fuss about having a woman in his detachment, so I was quickly reposted to Salmon Arm. I had no idea any of this was going on. But because of this, I became the detachment project. I got a very warm reception. The wives wanted to meet me as well and check me out, so to speak, because there had been some controversy. So there was a luncheon planned right away. One of the wives took me aside and said how happy she was to meet me, that she had heard through the grapevine that I was blonde and beautiful. What can I say? The next lesson came quickly. Each recruit is assigned a trainer for a period of 3 to 6 months. My trainer was a great member and really helped me learn how to deal with people and to stay safe. I often think how courageous he was to take on training me, the very first woman in his town. I was determined to do my best, but again, without his courage to step up and take the lead, stand for what was right, my great start would not have happened. Although I have nothing but great memories of the experience, this social experiment was not without its moments. One day, very soon after I arrived, I was at the office and my trainer was busy with some paperwork. I was asked to get the mail. If you've ever been to Salmon Arm, you'll know that the Trans-Canada Highway runs directly through the middle of town. I took the police car and set out for the post office across the highway from the detachment. As I crossed the highway, I saw an intoxicated person in the middle of the road, clearly in danger of getting hit by a car. I positioned the car, my police car, as I'd been trained to do and got out. He only saw the stripe on my leg and the fight was on. Actually, I have to admit, it wasn't much of a fight as he was quite drunk and I was just out of training. I did, however, have quite an audience for that tussle. When I got him in the car, I couldn't resist driving him around downtown for a few moments so that everyone could see that I had completed my very first arrest alone. He kept saying to me, You must be that new cop. You're lost. The detachment is in the other direction, trying to help me out. I believe it was the influence and positive input of my trainer and the others that gave me the strength and self-confidence to get out of that car that very first time. I later got a call from a troopmate of mine in Kamloops, and she had heard that I had arrested a big logger and that I had won quite a fight. I told her the truth, but asked her not to correct the suburban myth, at least for a while. I have to admit that I was a bit of a tourist attraction in Salmon Arm, and I remember being asked for a picture while trying to write a speeding ticket. Back in the day, women were not allowed in bars either without an escort. Can you imagine the looks when I went in to arrest someone in a bar that I could not legally drink in? Throughout the time, I was subjected to a test or two. One day, on a rare occasion when it rained in Salmon Arm, I got a flat tire in a parking lot downtown. I radioed back to the office that I had a flat, silently hoping that someone would come and change the tire for me, but that didn't happen. So I changed it myself. Thank goodness they taught us how to do that in training. I finally just got the hubcap back on when 3 of my colleagues stepped out of the bushes and gave me a standing ovation. I had promised myself I would never accept special treatment, but that day I could have made an exception. Later, it was determined that I was qualified to work alone. This usually happens about 6 months after graduation, but this was Salmon Arm and it was summer. People needed holidays and the detachment was busy. My first night shift alone was scheduled. This was 1975. There were no such thing as portable radios or a cell phone then, and usually no backup after midnight. If you needed help, you had to get back to your police car and radio the next town to call someone out of bed to help you. That day, the staff sergeant, who would have gotten along very well with my dad, called me and said, "Tonight is your very first night shift. Are you nervous?" I said I felt rather confident, and he said that he wasn't so sure about it, and that if I needed some help, I should make sure that I called for backup. He also, believe it or not, gave me a cushion as a kind of booster seat for the police car. I told him I could see just fine, thank you very much, but he said it was so that I could look bigger in the police car. I could have allowed this to make me feel a little singled out, but instead I realized that he was just trying to be caring and had my best interest and my safety at heart. Self-respect that engenders self-confidence can actually change your life. Sometimes a negative experience can offer a springboard for motivation as well. I recall one evening when I was called to a break-in and enter and saw a surprised look on the face of the victim. She said, "I was hoping for a real Mountie." I made the decision at that moment to make this a challenge to ensure that by the end of the investigation, she would be so impressed by my work and happy that it was me who had come to her door. Another occasion that caused me a little education was when I was working alone and tried to stop an impaired driver. The situation quickly deteriorated when the person refused to stop the car when I turned on my lights, and I became involved in a slow speed chase. You cannot imagine how embarrassing it is to go 15 kilometers an hour with your lights and siren on and being unable to stop a car. He finally got to his driveway. For some reason, intoxicated people, especially impaired drivers, seem to feel that once they make it to their own driveway, that the laws of Canada no longer apply. He got out of the car and headed straight for the house. I tried my very best restraining technique after I placed him under arrest, but to no avail, and we began to struggle. During the fight, he passed out and fell to the ground. At that moment, his wife came out of the house, and I thought I was going to have trouble with her too. But to my surprise, she came rushing over and said, "Quick, let me help you get him into the car before he wakes up." Support can come in some very interesting places. Mark Twain once said, 20 years from now, you will be more disappointed by the things you didn't do than by the ones you did do. A large facet of success and professionalism entails having the courage to be yourself. When I first became a commissioned officer, fate intervened again. My next boss was a natural leader and mentor and knew how important it was to lead by example and set a tone of mutual respect. You can imagine that being the first female commissioned officer really put me in the spotlight. He understood that others would take a cue from him as to whether or not I would be accepted in management. Realizing this, he gave me all the operational responsibilities to manage. as I had a strong investigational background. The Critical Incident Response Team, or SWAT team, and all the plainclothes detective groups were assigned to me. These were very high-energy operational teams conducting high-risk activities. It required a level of personal commitment by all involved, as it could be very dangerous. All those that were under me were male, and many were senior to me in service. There's a saying that I cling to as my leadership mantra. No one cares how much you know until they know how much you care. Although this is important, it is important to have the knowledge of what you're doing. Showing that you truly care about the people you're working with will trump any other qualification you may hold and is the foundation of success in leadership at any level, I believe. Cultivating a respectful relationship, maintaining the trust of others, and honoring the legacy of those in the community you serve will be key to shaping your success in the future. Another example, during the inception of pepper spray training in the 1990s, it was the goal to have all the members trained in getting pepper sprayed. My boss explained to me one day that we were going to be the first district in Saskatchewan to have 100% participation because I was going first. How could any of these men refuse to be pepper sprayed if I was at the front of the line? It worked. We even got a call from headquarters in Regina asking how we had motivated over 200 members to agree to be pepper sprayed. We never gave away our secret. People will not invest of themselves without the assurance that their work is respected and their futures are considered important. This emotional intelligence demands that a leadership figure will do the right thing, that bosses will have the back of those that work for them in situations where good ideas are not always getting great results, that everyone succeeds together, but more importantly, that no one fails alone. As the commanding officer for British Columbia, there was an occasion when I was there to send approximately 300 riot troops to Quebec for the World Trade Conference in 2005. There was evidence that there would be violence against the police there, as had been the case at the previous conference in Seattle, which was renamed the Battle of Seattle. That year, there had been police officers badly injured with bricks and projectiles, and horses had been cut with razor blades, so my fears were well-founded. As a result, I went to the airport and shook the hands of each of the members as they boarded the plane and wished them well. This simple moment, a gesture anyone could have offered, cemented a level of respect and support I came to cherish throughout my career. It was no big deal, but they always remembered. A sense of humor is also a huge asset. Back when I began, I had mentioned that I was a bit of a tourist attraction. Well, I was a curiosity to the members as well. One day, very early in my career, I was invited to coffee by the highway patrol in the next town. I knew they just wanted to meet me and check me out, so to speak. One member asked if there was anyone at my detachment giving me a hard time. I replied that I felt sorry for anyone who was not supportive about women in the force, as they obviously had a sexual identity problem if they were anxious about women doing their job. These men all agreed that having women in the force was a great idea. Later in my career, I was often the only woman in the room, but never let that take the agenda. It might have been obvious to everyone there, but it was not obvious to me that I was sitting at the head of the table and that I was the only woman in the room. As the commissioner, I had a number of opportunities to travel through the country with my executive assistant, an officer recently commissioned. On more than one occasion, he got the suite with the nice note from management. He would call me and say, "Do you have a basket of fruit in your room? Are you in a suite?" We'd both laugh and realize that it was obvious that everyone checking in thought that he was the commissioner. It was only fair, I believe, because he worked much harder than I did, keeping me organized and on time. A great part of showing respect for those around you is your ability to just not take yourself so seriously. I have to tell you a story that I think brings this home in a big way for me. When I was the commanding officer of Saskatchewan, the musical ride came to town. My mother, who apart from being my biggest fan was visiting, wanted to go. As it happened that day, I was having the honor of taking the salute from the troop commander. As he made the salute, with my mother standing beside me, she leaned over and said, as only a mother from Nova Scotia could say, "You know, darling, I never imagined you'd get this far." Life offers an opportunity to be your best and to bring the best out in others, and it's your responsibility to realize yours and others' true potential and to pay it forward. Nothing speaks disrespect for others louder than acting like you're creating all the success by yourself. I love to go to the cafeteria in Ottawa years later, and instead of going to the officers' dining room, I would sit with the constables and hear what was going on, what their challenges were, and I recall the deer in the headlights look on their faces as I headed their way with my tray. But the big payoff was that they knew I was genuinely interested in them and respected their contribution. In conclusion, a teacher once asked a student to sum up Socrates' life in 4 lines. Here's what he said. Socrates lived long ago. He was very intelligent. Socrates gave long speeches and his friends poisoned him. With that comment, I'll wrap it up. We now take for granted many of the opportunities that are only dreamed of a generation ago. If there's anything I would like you to take away from this conversation, is that the concept of trust and respect are the most important facets of the excellence that you all pursue, and that leadership happens at every level of life and endeavor. I applaud your commitment to the path you have chosen in education. By your attendance here today at this Congress, you are confirming the caliber of professionalism that you and your colleagues exercise every day to make a difference in the rural communities you serve and for the young people who depend on your inspiration. Thank you so very much for the honor of speaking to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Busson, for your address. Well, there are so many kernels of gold in your address today. I don't know that you know this, but I have done a lot of work on women in leadership and women in leadership in rural communities. So much of what you were speaking about, though it might be in a different context, certainly resonated. I can't imagine me wandering around with a purse with a gun in it in the school system, but I can certainly say that once in a while it might have come to mind. So one of the questions I have for you as a leader who really blazed trails for us, some of the things that matter is diversity, and diversity in the RCMP. And over time, as you've seen that develop and grow, it started obviously in your experience with women as leaders and as part of it. What have you seen over time in the force as diversity has increased in that space?
Begin with women. There were no people of color, no First Nations, no ethnic diversity of any kind, let alone any kind of religious diversity. When you take a snapshot of the RCMP today, I believe it's representative of communities. I believe the force is working very hard to recruit the best out of communities, and to make sure that the people who represent the force also represent the communities, and the community can see themselves in the people that are policing them. And I believe that's very important in finding the commonality when you are trying to be a police officer, and especially a community police officer. Because in Canada, despite the issues that seem to be taking the headlines, the force policing cannot exist without community support, and vice versa. And it's a struggle sometimes. It's very difficult, but I believe that the force has truly woken up to that need. And if you look at who the force is hiring now, it's incredibly diverse and exciting. Women of color, men also from numbers of different cultural backgrounds, religious backgrounds. There was, again, pushback when the force began talking about accepting, allowing, terrible word, people of Sikh religion to wear turbans. Now that's just a given. So I do believe that the force and the world has come a long way in the last 50, 60 years. It really is a paradigm shift, I believe, for everyone.
That's come in from our audience members, and I encourage all of you to keep them coming. Whether it may be as part of your experience in the force, or it might be as part of your experience as a leader in the political realm now. Certainly our rural viewers are interested in your understanding of what do you see as being some of the most important skills and values for leadership today in our various milieus.
Thank you. I think, as I've mentioned, I really believe that it really does boil down to respect and trust. Because when you ask someone to engage in even a project, you're asking someone to put their own personal reputation on the line to do a job and to do it well. You can get someone doing a 9 to 5, pushing the buttons, putting in their how many hours a day, how many hours a week. But when you really want results, when you really want commitment, you have to show respect for those individuals and build a mutual relationship of trust where they will trust you not to throw them under the bus if there's some project that doesn't go perfectly well, and at the same time, when it does, not to take all the credit for what's happened as a team. And I believe that you can accomplish amazing things if people are all pulling in the right direction. And I think you mentioned rural communities. The work done in rural communities, I think, is so very important because you really can make a difference with your efforts. It is so much more evident when people are really putting their shoulder to the grindstone on a project, doing great work in a small community. The effects are almost instantaneous and long lasting. So I believe it's a great environment to do that. But again, I think you have to build teamwork through trust and mutual respect.
So one of the comments that I heard you say that I think matters so much is that your movement into the force brought you to a future that you had never imagined. So one of this is part of the crux for rural educators, I think, in that we're all hoping, as people who are committed to rural education and to rural children, youth, and communities, that we are equipping them for futures that they may never have imagined. Whether that winds up being in their home communities, of course, we like to keep them at home, but there's a whole world out there, and our global audience is saying that. And we also need to equip them with that courage to make those leaps. Do you have any advice on what were some of either the personality traits you inherently had or some of the people around you, advice that they gave you, support that they offered that helped that become that reality for you, that gave you the courage to move towards a future that you were unsure about, you really knew you wanted, but it was a future that many women had never imagined before?
Mm-hmm. You know, I never give up an opportunity to speak to young people, and have a number of chances through the Senate. They have a group called Cengage where they connect senators with classes, and we talk. And I say exactly that to young people, that have a plan, but don't think that this plan is going to work out perfectly, because most times you underestimate the amazing things that can happen to you if you just dare to dream. And I guess for me, when I mentioned I came from a not wealthy family, is a bit of an understatement. I was the first person in my family to ever go to college or university, and I think it may have been a little bit of whether it was naivete or optimism, but I've always believed in my life that you have a choice of your perspective of how you see the world, and you can experience life with a helmet on and miss a whole lot of what's happening, or just carefully, but at the same time see the best in people, and it often brings out the best in people. If you take the high road, you find more people there than you would expect. So I think when I look back on what was I thinking, really, what was I thinking? And of course, there are stories that some members, male and female, did not do well then or later in their careers. But I think for me, I've just ran people over with enthusiasm and a positive attitude, and worked really hard, but at the same time didn't make a say a campaign out of it. I did the best that I could do, tried to satisfy myself that I was working to my potential, and always try to help other people. And that's it. People will watch, I believe, too, as you engage in things. If you reach out to others, it becomes a bit contagious. When not a good word during these times, but other people will feel the same, and paying it forward, or at least helping people who need a hand, really does help. But I really can't say enough about having a positive attitude and not allowing the negativism around you to overtake the agenda, because as they say, drinking out of the top half or the bottom half of the glass, I really think it is a choice, and you can do a lot to bring people your way.
Thank you for that. One of the other pieces that you mentioned was that need to honor the legacy of the community members you serve. I think many of us that work in rural education have heard a lot of deficit thinking, a lot of deficit writing, a lot of deficit understandings about rural communities being less than, or the country bumpkin kind of stereotype, right? And yet we know, with the number of globalizing and urbanizing policies that have affected rural education, but rural communities generally across Canada and around the world, that in many respects, rural people have been innovative out of necessity, just as a matter of being, right? They make do with what they have. They've got local knowledges and understandings that are generational, that are land-based, that come out of the goodness of people living in relationship with one another. Where did you learn that lesson? And yet where did you also learn how, as a leader, that sometimes some things need to change, and we need to respect that traditionalism, that understanding, those local knowledges, and yet move forward into a world that sometimes needs us to think differently?
Well, it's I haven't thought of where I learned this, but I learned it fairly quickly. And as you posed the question, I'm thinking about when I first came to Salmon Arm, which is, in my experience at that time, was a small town, although it had about 12,000 people in it in the summertime. But I've spent time in much smaller towns than that too, and watched people come into town with great ideas and trying to change things without actually getting the input and feedback from the people, and trying to push their ideas. I think I'll use my policing context as to police a small town in Saskatchewan. The people of the town should have input as to how those people want to be policed, what their level of tolerance is, what their issues are. And I think in education is the same thing. If you tie the needs and aspirations of the community, and, as you say, their legacy to next steps, you don't get treated like an outsider, and you can engage people there in being some of your best allies, rather than alienating folks and, at the end of the day, delivering something nobody wanted in the first place.
So one of the other pieces that's a kernel of wisdom in your discussion today has been around valuing that openness and beauty of the diversity in people and communities around you. And yet you're exemplifying in your own example sort of an independent spirit, right? That may go against the norm, but in a very good way. Very good way. So there's that piece, there's a balance here about the independent spirit of trailblazing and making sure that, you have a moment for yourself, but also you have this real grounded notion that it has to be tempered with support and reciprocity for that community spirit. How do we keep that alive in rural communities now, where really, we're being encouraged to be individualistic? Community spirit, as these communities are struggling in so very many ways, becomes damaged, even though it still exists and thrives. How do we maintain for our children and youth that fight for the independent spirit but also the recognition that community reciprocity matters?
Wow, hard question, but I think I don't think that those two things are um, um, in conflict with one another. I believe that, you know, if you are a trailblazer, if you, or just an independent thinker, as you work through communities, having respect for the people that are there is really part of building their own self-confidence and their own abilities to move forward. I think one of the sad things that can happen is that we forget who you're working for. You forget what's the goal here. You have to keep your eye on what you're trying to accomplish. I know in the force, being a leader is really you're leading people to their best potential, not yours. And as you work in communities, I think it's important to respect where these folks are coming from and what they want. And at the same time, most people want to be a part of that future and not put in a backwater. So both of those things can happen at the same time. I don't think one is exclusive of the other. And mutual respect and listening, being a good listener, is I think incredibly important. And to me, from a policing perspective and from an education perspective, and I don't presume to know anything about education anymore. It's been a long time, but people, as you said, and it struck me when you spoke, we're not in communities to have everybody go to university and leave. People, there's a lot of value to keeping people, not keeping, offering the kind of legacy where people are happy to stay where they are and participate in the world. The world is getting smaller every day. You don't have to leave.
Thank you. And then I think we have one final question for you that's come from our group. And chances are you've had to initiate oh, no, there's more coming, so hold on. So, the next question we have for you actually is, how do you, this sounds like you've maybe done a few of these in your time, so whether it is about being in the force or being a senator in those leadership kinds of positions, many of us are rural educators. We sit around board tables, we're in classrooms, and we are constantly trying to initiate what we'd like to call courageous conversations. So, whether that's about change, whether that's about doing something differently, whether it's about thinking differently, whether it's about a challenge to our traditions, etc. What advice do you have for those of us who feel a responsibility to initiate these courageous conversations in ways that keep relationships intact but move us forward?
Wow. I think the key to that, as I'm thinking about the environment that I worked in, is you have to lead by example. You can't expect other people to invest their own personal lives and become engaged in a way that people need to be engaged in whatever you're working to accomplish, in the goals you're working to accomplish. If you don't, not just lead by example, but be that person that you hope the people that work for you want you to be, and acknowledge their contribution at every stage. And I always used to tell myself, if I was one of the other people in the room, what would I want to hear from my boss? What would I want to hear from the person who is leading this charge, whatever it is, who are trying to do a project, complete an investigation, in the case of education, bring a higher caliber of delivery to a community. But as a leader, as you say, building these difficult conversations, you can't direct it. When you build trust in a group or in a team, it has to be earned. You have to really be a part of that and do the things that people want you, do the things that engender trust, like give credit where credit is due, acknowledge people. And another thing I found, and this may come true, people, I'm sure it comes true. I find in a lot of situation, how people seem to be driven. And when a person in an advisory role or a leadership role allows people to have a work-life balance and respects their whole life, not just their work, but acknowledges them as a person, I think you can get some amazing buy-in. And as you say, engage in some very difficult and challenging conversations, because especially, my husband reminds me that it's very important for men too, but it tends to be the female of our species who has the extra responsibility generally for the family as well, and to allow a person to put their family as one of their priorities will really, I believe, begin to engender that kind of trust and that kind of investment that I don't think you get if you just keep demanding more and more without understanding the person's own context and what they have as other pressures, because you get the whole package. So you have to really understand and appreciate what people are living through once they close the door at the end of the day.
Okay, thank you. We have another question here that says, you talk a lot about trust. What needs to be done when trust has been broken?
Wow. It's hard to say, because you're not always working on a level playing field with folks. But I think you have to, as I say, I'm a bit of an optimist, and I try to see the best in people. And if you assume that there's some malfeasance behind a break in trust right away, then you don't have much or any chance to remediate the situation. So I in every case is of course different, but I really think you have to sit down privately, face to face, and allow whoever you feel has betrayed a trust or undermined some part of your work, and find out what's going on. And a lot of times you can figure out fairly quickly whether this person has a bad motivation, or just was having a bad day, or didn't get it, or might have had something else happening. But I think it's really important to address it right away, because these kinds of things fester. And number two, to keep an open mind that maybe it's not as malicious or as negative as you might have first thought. And in some cases, if people are approached, you can find out some interesting things about why things don't go the way you want, or the way you had envisioned. So that's the first case. And then there are bad people in the world that aren't team players, and under those situations, you just have to deal with your HR protocols, and do what you can to support them if it's lack of knowledge or whatever. But I believe in the goodness of human nature. First off, give everyone a chance. In most cases, you benefit from that.
Okay, and then I think we have a final question here for you today, and this is related more to your time in the force. I'm assuming it's probably from one of our Canadian spaces. Do you think, it's actually two parts, do you think that community policing is here to stay? And here's the other one. You've had the good fortune to live across Canada. Do you have a favorite space?
Oh, well, I'll answer the second part first. We've lived in, my family and I've lived in North Battleford and in Regina for a number of years, and I'm still a Rough Riders fan. So the Saskatchewan Rough Riders, of course, and we've got the green flag hanging on a flagpole at our house. So Saskatchewan has made a huge impact on my life, and people say that once you've lived in Saskatchewan, you always have a piece of Saskatchewan in your heart, and that's absolutely true. So that's the second part of the question, and the first part of the question was about. I'm sorry, I got misty about Saskatchewan.
Community policing is here to stay.
Oh, community policing. Honestly, that's a great question, and it's a great way to end this session if we're ending, because I used to, and every chance I can today, talk about the Canadian tradition of policing compared to perhaps our neighbors to the south, who see policing as, the police against the state, or the state as against the people. Canadian policing began as a community policing project, and in Canada, even in the law books, Canadian police officers are referred to in formal law books and in the law as peace officers. That they bring peace, law enforcement, I used to tell the people that worked for me, was what happened when everything else failed. If you, as a peace officer, when all the other tactics fail, you have to do law enforcement. But up to then, working with young people in communities, and I hope that those of you who do work in rural communities have seen the hard work that a lot of police officers do with young people, interfacing with the homeless, a number of things that are community-based and not necessarily, quote, law enforcement. So I believe that today, and I keep in contact with a number of police leaders today too, that you cannot be a successful police force without a connection to the people in those communities, because otherwise it becomes the kind of environment that we see in other places. And I'll be quite frank that although there's been a lot of stress in the last year or so around terrible things that have happened in policing, a lot of those stressors are in places where they've lost the community policing concept and lost contact with people. And I'm really hoping that despite the cross-border television that we get, the cross-border news, that Canadian policing can still stay connected to the people that it works for. Because as they say, the police are the community and the community are the police. And without community policing, it's just law enforcement. And that's a very sad place to be.
Thank you, Senator. That is a wonderful way to conclude this evening. It has truly been an honor to have you speak to our group this evening. I think I can say that from across the world, your commitment to rural spaces, to equity, to an independent spirit, and finding your way in the world, even amidst ambiguity, is actually truly admirable. So I'd like to say on behalf of our Congress, we're indebted to you not only for your generosity this evening, but your commitment to speak with us on a Sunday afternoon. And of course, as another rural Rough Rider fan, we're going to hopefully bring you back sometime, because we need all of us that we can get. So thank you very much for being with us this evening.
It was totally my pleasure. And as I said, I have a soft spot for Saskatchewan, and of course, I'm at your service. And thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you. So we are almost at the time for our final highlight that's going to uplift us for the end of the evening. And in between that time, of course, it is time for some acknowledgements. So I want to first acknowledge the work of two different groups that have helped us create the masterpiece you see on our website. The first group is our National Congress on Rural Education in Canada Provincial Planning Team. It consists of individuals that represent a number of educational partners across Saskatchewan, and they've all got a vested interest in rural, remote, and in our case, northern education. All of these individuals' names and organizations can be found on our website, so I won't go through the entire list because there are so many of you. But I want to thank each and every one of you for your continued commitment to our event and for believing in our renewed vision for this year. You took a chance on our redesign, and I think it is turning out beautifully. So thank you, and kudos to all of you for all of the help and commitment that you've given to us. I also, of course, have to acknowledge our internal planning team, and that it consists of Patricia Prowse, Holly Mays, Udowu Mogaji, Kevin Sharp, Rob Lovelace, and Megan Hinther. It is a small but mighty group that has coordinated this event for us, and an event that I actually is considered to be a world-class event for the next day and a half. I want to acknowledge each and every one of you for the work you've done to ensure that this 26th national, 26th, but actually our first virtual event is moving us into a future where we think differently about how to bring all of us together from across the world to engage in important and courageous conversations about rural and remote education. I want to also thank Media Productions, who's here today and over the next day and a half, for helping us kick off our event and making sure that our keynotes feel comfortable speaking in this online medium. It's good to know we can count on your experience to help us with the planning and presentation of the event. We also want to take a moment to acknowledge our sponsors, without whose commitment we couldn't have created an event of this kind of caliber. We are indebted to the Ministry of Education in this province, who annually commits to rural education through significant sponsorship, through presenting at our conference, and through attending it. We were also supported this year with a significant grant from the University of Saskatchewan Conference Grants Program. And as you heard earlier, SaskTel continues to be an important sponsor of our event. And we also thank a number of other groups who've provided either sponsorship or in-kind support contributions, including the College of Education that I noted earlier, the Department of Educational Administration, the Saskatchewan Education Leadership Unit, WorkSafe Saskatchewan, and Eagle Feather News. So our opening ceremonies would just not be complete without showcasing the cultural talent we have in our midst that speaks to our province's Métis history and tradition. When you see the joy and expression inherent in this performance, I think you will not help but be uplifted by our two performers this evening. We have two performers who have decided to regale us, and I've watched them online actually, and just watching them makes you want to jig right along with them. Kate Boyer is a second-year Métis student from St. Laurent, Saskatchewan. She's been dancing professionally since she was 9, and she continues to share her culture through her passion for jigging. Kurt Nadamagan is a third-year Métis student in the Saskatchewan Urban Native Teacher Education Program. He is originally from Pine House Lake and is a fluent Cree language speaker. His major is in Indigenous Studies and his minor is Visual Arts. He's been jigging since he was 8, and I don't think he's been able to stop since. So with that, I want to welcome Kate and Kurt and to highlight the wonderful cultural expression we have in our Métis community.
Well, hi, everybody. This is obviously much different, or very different from what I'm used to dancing. There's maybe like 4 people in this room right now, and there's usually a lot more of you, but I'm kind of glad that I'm getting back into it slowly, because it's been kind of a whole year of not seeing anybody. So even this kind of, I get the butterflies and stuff. I'm like, oh, people. So we're going to do 3 dances today. I'm going to do 2, and then my partner's going to join me for the last one. And I'm just going to give you a brief introduction about each of the dances, because I think it's important to know kind of what they're about, and it makes dance more interesting as well. But I'm not going to keep you too long, because I know some of you are probably tuning in from weird time change places and you just kind of want to get to bed. I'm sure some of you, it's like 1 o'clock where you are. So the first dance that I'm going to do is called the sash dance. The Métis sash is what I'm wearing right here and what is on the floor behind me. It represents our culture. It's one of like the most recognizable symbols of Métis culture. The colors and the weave sometimes are said to represent your family or the area you came from. That's kind of what mine represents. Mine was given to me by a very close friend, so usually they have quite a deep meaning for the individual who owns them. And the dance that I'm going to do with them originated from the Scottish sword dance, actually, where they would cross 2 swords and then dance around them. But Métis people kind of had dangerous lives generally, and so they thought that maybe dancing over swords was not a great idea. Like if you're gonna take something out, maybe the swords is the way to go. So now they're dancing over sashes, and that's where this dance came from. The next dance I'm going to do will be the broom dance. If you're wondering why there's a broom behind me, that's why. And it originated when two trappers were alone in the bush and they were feeling kind of lonely. They were, catching some food for their families, but their families didn't come with them. And one of the trappers pulled a fiddle out of his bag and played because he felt so lonely and so sad. And the other one, trying to lighten the spirits of his friend, grabbed a broom and started to dance with it instead of a partner. So that will be the next dance, which is always kind of fun. And people always look at me like I'm crazy because I'm carrying a broom everywhere. So you can enjoy that. And then the last dance that me and Kurt are going to do together is just the traditional Red River jig. I think it's really fun. You can kind of just go wild with it, honestly, which is why I like it so much. It's kind of a dance of endurance. Like, you can do it as long as you can, basically. That's not what we're going to do today because neither of us want to die. But it's just a lot of fun. Usually you do it in a party setting, and there's a basic step, and then you'll see a change to a fancy step. And it's really about skill, endurance, and just passion for dance and sharing culture. So I hope you enjoy what we have for you today, and thanks for sticking around this long. You've done so well.
Thank you so much. Now that is an aerobic workout. Kurt and Kate, thanks for sharing. Thanks not only for your enthusiasm, but for sharing your culture with us. It's wonderful. We could not start this event without the two of you here. Yeah. Thanks. Thank you. So I wouldn't be alone in my thoughts, I don't think, if I said that watching that kind of love for jigging makes everybody want to jig along. You can also see that whole space where the Métis culture came from rural spaces that made do with brooms if they didn't have partners. Whatever works. But it's a true love of family, of tradition, and of spending time with your loved ones, doing things that uplifts you. And so I hope that each of you tonight will do things that uplift yourselves as you get ready for an action-packed day for tomorrow. So, thank you. So we're going to close this evening with a few final housekeeping details. First, thanks to all of you who contributed to today's event. I'm going to give special thanks to Elder Spidell for helping us open up in a good way today. For our dignitaries who brought greetings and welcomed all of you to this space and territory and to our Congress. The Honourable Bev Busson, who brought forward an amazing message to kick off our day. And our amazing student performers, Kurt and Kate, who wanted to make sure they had a little piece of Métis culture to share with you this evening. So tomorrow is action-packed. We've got an excellent program for you with more choice than you probably would have ever imagined. It's going to include 2 keynote presentations, an international panel, and a single keynote by Dr. Diane Lucker. You have an opportunity to engage with these presenters through another question and answer space that we had today. So again, you'll be able to use the email system or the tweet to send emails on those 2 live streamed events. And then that information will be available at the bottom of a slide to help you remember. There are 48 learning sessions available for you tomorrow, and it is likely going to be very difficult to choose from only 5. But we did send a planner for you to help plan, so try to make sure that you have a first choice and a second choice. We've got the web links, the links were sent to you in your sessions, and the personal planner was sent in your email. If by some chance you never got those, just hook into us tonight and we'll make sure that you get them before tomorrow. And remember that in as well to the learning sessions and the live streamed events, you can also go on our website and access an additional 9 separate pre-recorded graduate student presentations, as well as 2 resource presentations that were forwarded for the event. They're going to be available on our site and will remain there until April 3rd. So even though those aren't related directly to rural education, we wanted to make sure you had a chance to see and highlight the research that's going on with our graduate students here at the College of Education. Whether or not they're completed projects, they are showcasing and highlighting what is being done with our graduate students, and also some of the resources that are available that particularly target rural educators and rural communities that might be helpful for you in your school systems. So with that, I don't want to keep any of you longer. I know some of you are on very different time zones, so I want to just send a final welcome to our event. We will see you at 8:30 a.m. CST, Standard Time, in Saskatchewan. So have a lovely evening, whatever part of the day it is for you, and we will see you tomorrow morning. Good evening.